Chairman.
The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have been fascinated by, and not necessarily in a good way, by the evolution of the defense in this case. Mr. Chairman, initially it started when Lois Lerner disclosed this information in a fashion most calculated to be ignored, with a planted question at some boring conference. And then the second iteration of this defense was blaming two rogue agents in the Ohio field office. And Mr. Chairman, make no mistake, Jay Carney advanced and furthered that narrative, and he did so intentionally. You know, Mr. Carney's willingness to say, I don't know, is exceeded perhaps only by his willingness to acknowledge that he appreciates the question. But he didn't say, I don't know. He advanced the narrative that two rogue agents were responsible for this insidious discriminatory practice. And then we had colleagues that said this matter was closed. Months ago, Mr. Chairman, the matter was closed. And then the new iteration of the defense is, well, at least the White House isn't directly involved, as if that's the new standard for propriety in this town, that at least the White House directly didn't know about it. So that's our defense. And then the defense, Mr. Chairman, morphed into this, the most novel of all defenses, that the IRS is too poorly managed to be capable of concocting a scheme this sophisticated. That was the defense, that my client's too dumb to have committed this crime. And then, Mr. Chairman, we moved to the most recent defense, which is that, no, we didn't just improperly target conservative groups, we improperly targeted all groups. So while we may be guilty of improper conduct, we're not guilty of discrimination, because we did it against people at both ends of the political spectrum. So that's our defense. And now to see the Inspector General attacked. You know, Mr. Chairman, there was an axiom in court that if you had the facts, pound the facts. If you had the law, pound the law. If you didn't have either one, pound the judge. And what's been said about Mr. George is reprehensible, and I can't wait till he has an opportunity to defend himself. But let me tell you what else is reprehensible, Mr. Chairman. Lois Lerner sat where those two witnesses sit today, several weeks ago. And these two witnesses put on a uniform and fought and defended this country and the Constitution so she could hide behind the Constitution, invoke her Fifth Amendment right, but only after she blamed them. She blamed two rogue agents in Ohio, and then didn't have the courage that these witnesses. I ought to just be thankful anytime IRS agents don't invoke the Fifth Amendment. I ought to be glad that anyone's willing to come before a committee of Congress and testify. But to have these two people's reputation, or whoever she was talking about, besmirched by someone who doesn't even have the courage to come do what they're doing? Mr. Hall, I appreciate your modesty. It's not something we see very often in this town. But you have been in service to the IRS for exactly as long as I've been alive. 48 years. So whether you want to be called an expert or not, you are one. By virtue of your training and your expertise and your education, and so are you, Ms. Hoffaker. You're both experts. And if we were in a court of law, the defense would stipulate that you're experts. They would even challenge it. So I've heard about the complexities, and I've heard about the novel issues, but Mr. Hall, there's nothing novel about political activity. It's been going around since before the country was founded. So that part of the analysis, what was novel about that? What's novel about determining political activity?
Each case is looked at and depends on the facts and circumstances of each particular case.
And you've done it 100 times. Times 100 times, right?
I'm not aware of how many political cases I may have worked.
Is it because you can't count that high? I mean, it's a lot, right?
I can't remember that far back, sir.
Well, I can't either. But there's nothing new about political activity. And our numeric code we've had since Lord knows when. I think it's Arabic, but ascertaining 50% is not a new phenomenon. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm at a time, I'm just vexed by the complexity that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about. It's political activity. 50.1% will disqualify you. And the tax code's been around forever. So what's new about this? Why did we have to have test cases? Why did we have to have Washington involved on what strikes me as a pretty simple analysis? But I'm out of time, and I yield back to the chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Rice, I want to thank you for being here, Ms. Rice, and I want to tell you, I doubt any of the members of this committee that I'm looking at now have any idea what you just described. But we do realize and recognize courage when we see it, and we want to thank you for what we can imagine is an impossibly difficult task. I want to change gears for just a second. You testified early on that you loved your job. I want you to tell the members of the committee what you love most about your job as a firefighter.
Put your, microphone.
Being in the woods, protecting the forest, fighting fire.
And you've done it for how long?
Over 20 years.
All right. To the extent you feel comfortable, can you tell the members of the committee what harassment/abuse you experienced?
From the perpetrator or just in general?
From the perpetrator.
He was constantly making comments. He removed me from my office where I had a counterpart to an office back and out of the way where he could come in the office and make comments and approach me. He has, the reason I filed was because I was in his office and we were having an argument, and he had taken a letter opener and poked my breasts, both breasts, with a smile on his face in this arrogant way, like he could get away with it. And I just stood there in shock. He has cornered me in the bathroom. He has lifted my shirt up. He has stalked me. I would wait till everybody would leave so I could pull in because I work in the field, and he would be waiting for me. He called me constantly. He interfered with everything. He stalked me.
Ms. Lago, Ms. Rice testified that the details of her complaint were made public. Why would that possibly happen?
Well, it is not permitted. It's the first time that I've heard the details were made public. Per our protocol, only people involved in the investigation.
Listen, I don't want to be rude, but I really don't give a damn about protocol. Do you doubt what Ms. Rice just testified to, that the details of her accusations and allegations were made public?
Well, I'm just saying, I never heard that before now. I'm just
So do you doubt it, is my question. Not whether or not you've heard it, do you doubt it?
No, I don't doubt it.
Okay. Well, if it's against protocol, as you say, and you don't doubt that it happened, what have you done about it?
I just heard it. I just heard about it.
What are you going to do about it?
I'm going to ask what happened following her investigation, who knew about it, and why.
Well, if memory serves, her perpetrator was allowed to retire. Is that correct? Had you heard that before today?
Yes.
Okay, why? Why was he allowed to retire?
When someone's proposed for removal, they have a right to either retire or resign.
So what consequences would there be for his misconduct if he was allowed to retire?
There could be legal action.
Such as?
He could be sued. He could be...
Privately by her?
Yeah.
Yes. What did y'all do? You were the employer.
We fired
What did
him.
you do? No, you didn't fire him. He retired. We just established that.
He retired in lieu of being removed from his job.
Well, then why, if there's no difference between retiring and being fired, why didn't you fire him? There must be some benefit to retiring. What is that benefit?
You don't have removal on your record.
So you did confer a benefit to him despite the fact that you don't doubt the allegations that she just made.
We don't have an alternative to fire someone and not offer them retirement.
Well, I just heard the most glowing account of all of the improvements that have been made over the past 8 years. And you mean to tell me that someone can engage in the conduct that Ms. Rice just described and avoid all consequence whatsoever?
Per the federal regulations, yes, someone can retire or resign in lieu of being removed.
Ms. Rice, how long was the investigation ongoing?
At least 6 months.
You testified that you were forced to give multiple accounts of your harassment/abuse.
Correct.
That would be the antithesis to best practices for sex assault victims. So, Ms. Lago, why would victims of sexual harassment or assault be forced to give multiple testimonies or accounts?
At first, the issue was referred to law enforcement. Law enforcement referred it to the IG because of the nature of the offense. I'm not sure how far the IG investigation went, so to answer your question, a reason someone might have to give an account more than once is they might have to speak to an OIG investigator because of their investigation. They might have to speak to law enforcement. And if either of those investigations aren't conclusive, then we do a misconduct investigation.
Do you agree with what Ms. Rice described as a crime?
Yes, I do.
All right, so she would talk to law enforcement first?
She spoke to her supervisor,
Okay.
referred the issue.
Who was the first statement made to?
I don't know.
All right. Well, let me encourage you to do this in the past when y'all are describing the glowing progress that you have made. Making victims give multiple accounts, tell what happened to them multiple times, runs afoul of everything every expert in sex assault and sex harassment cases teach. It runs afoul of all of it. So if you can find a way to limit victims to just having to relive it one time, I would encourage you to do so. And if you can share the regulations that allow someone to commit the conduct that she just described to be conferred the benefit of retirement as opposed to removal, if you could share those regulations with the chairman and the ranking member, I would be most grateful to you.
I will do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am trying to reconcile how Benghazi was not safe enough for the Federal Bureau of Investigation to go, but it was safe enough to leave a below-spec facility for our diplomats to stay in. I'm just trying to reconcile those 2 points. It's too dangerous for the Bureau, who are trained law enforcement officials, but it's just fine for diplomats. At some point, I'll reconcile that. Let me do this, Mr. Hicks. I'm going to dust off something called the best evidence rule. The best evidence of what you said when you were asked about Mr. Chaffetz's visit is actually what you said. So here it is. Those instructions were to arrange the visit in such a way that Representative Chaffetz and his staff would not have the opportunity to interview myself, John Martinick, and David McFarland alone. That's what you said in a deposition. So there shouldn't be any ambiguity about who said what when. That's your testimony. Now, I'd like to try to weave this tapestry together because this will be the last opportunity I have certainly today to talk to you. If I understand your testimony correctly, Mr. Hicks, and I want to be fair about it, so if I mischaracterize anything, you need to correct me. If I understand your testimony in part, the ambassador was interested in going to Benghazi because of interest that Secretary Clinton had in Benghazi. Is that fair?
That's fair.
All right. Now, Mr. Nordstrom, same thing to you. And if I'm unfair in my characterization, you need to correct me. I thought I understood your testimony to be that Secretary Clinton alone was able to approve facilities that were below specs.
That's correct. Part of the specs. There's two categories, SECA and OSPB. She is the only one that can authorize waivers for SECA. In this case, both apply because we didn't meet either.
So we are able to show that in part he went to Benghazi because of Secretary Clinton, In part, Benghazi was still open despite the fact it was below specs because of Secretary Clinton. And now to my third point, to complete the circle, who is Cheryl Mills?
Counselor and Chief of Staff to the Secretary.
And she was copied on that email that I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are going to have a press conference on as soon as we get out of here, calling on the State Department to release this email. I know it, because I have heard all afternoon about denying access to documents, and they do not want to deny the public or the media access to this document. So I know they're going to call on the State Department to release this non-classified email, which Cheryl Mills was copied on, which demonstrably undercuts Susan Rice's talking points. And Cheryl Mills was copied on that email.
Mr. Gowdy, if I could add, Cheryl Mills was also the person that led our preparation for our October testimony. I'd never met her before, but that was explained to me who she was afterwards.
And apparently, she was also less than pleased with Mr. Chaffetz's visit to Libya, if I understood that testimony correctly, which I find stunning. He's a subcommittee chairman on oversight, one of the more decent human beings I've ever met. I've never known him to inspire that strong of emotion in anyone other than Ms. Mills. Let me say this to you, Ambassador, in conclusion. You have made a compelling case today for why it is important to tell other countries the truth. You made a compelling case that the decision not to tell the truth on Sunday morning talk shows adversely impacted our ability to get to Benghazi. You made a compelling case. All three of you have made a compelling case today on why it is important for government to tell the truth to its own citizens. So you made the case why we have to tell the truth to other countries, and you made the case on why you have to tell the truth to your own citizens. So if anyone wants to know what difference does it make, if anyone wants to ask what difference does it make, it always matters whether or not you can trust your government. And to the families, we're going to find out what happened in Benghazi, and I don't give a damn whose career is impacted. We're going to find out what happened. And with that, I would yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?